we need to touch on some NBA stuff. We are 3 days away from finals tip-off as of the recording of this podcast tonight. Let's review really quickly the way the semifinals ended, or the conference finals, I should say.
Yeah.
The Celtics swept the Pacers, and I wanted to ask you just to give me just a quick minute, your thoughts of the Pacers season. Obviously, it flamed out as almost all the Celtics opponents, interestingly enough, have flamed out with injury. Tyrese Halliburton, of course, missing games 3 and 4. Having said that, the Pacers did put up an admirable fight, especially in game 3. Ultimately, Celtics just too talented and finished this. I wanted to ask you how reasonable, like how surprised you would be if we're here next year and the Pacers are back in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then also just give me your thoughts on their season, which started from humble beginnings and led to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, answer your question immediately. I would say not too surprised. I mean, the Pacers are always really scrappy. They're never intimidated. They have huge rivalries with a lot of the Eastern Conference teams, so I wouldn't be that surprised. Very unfortunate that Tyrese Halliburton got hurt. Awesome to see Pascal Siakam take more of a leadership role on this team, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, he's going to be a free agent. I think there's questions of him re-signing. Is that correct?
That's the risk they took in bringing him in. I believe you're right.
So I think that it depends if they keep him, because he was awesome in the playoffs. So if they lose him, I think their chances, unless they have a replacement or get a trade or something happens, assuming that they can't fill that void of Pascal Siakam if he leaves, I don't think they're going to go back to the Eastern Conference Finals. But if they keep him, they retool. I think they got a good shot. I was really impressed by the season. Really scrappy team. Really good defensively in some spots, but just ran out of juice there. And the Halliburton injury just really was the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I think if you're a Pacers fan, if you're the Pacers organization, I think you're proud of this season, though, and the steps that this team took. I mean, starting with a little bit of splash, a little bit of a foreshadow, I guess, with the in-season tournament and the noise they made there. And nobody really expected them to be out of the play-in tournament. I mean, some people would have expected maybe out of the play-in tournament as in like the 11th seed, but I don't think anyone was expecting them to be a 6th seed or better. So very impressive. Got to give, I think, a kudos to Coach Carlisle there, Coach Rick Carlisle, for the job that he did in building this up. And then, of course, Halliburton had an amazing season overall. There was some injuries that hampered his season, especially towards the midway point and towards the end there, obviously, with how the series ended. But kudos to the Pacers. Great season. I wanted to ask your thoughts about the Celtics playoff run to this point. I don't want to get into predictions yet. We will go there, but let's hold off on our predictions against Dallas and just tell me what you think of this whole narrative that I guess is probably overplayed, but the Celtics had a cakewalk to the finals, etc. They're not ready for any sort of challenge from whatever Western Conference team. How much do you buy into this? How much do you weigh that narrative as accurate or worthwhile?
It's so tough unless you have hardcore evidence that points to that being the case, and if they lose in the finals. So if we hear Tatum and Brown being like, hey, let's just say it's 3 months from now or whatever, when they retire, and they reflect back and they think, hey, we were flat and we weren't challenged. I think that's a dangerous storyline to just throw out there unless there's a lot of evidence to point to that. So I won't lean into that. I just think they're too talented of a team, they have too much experience, and their core is defense, and I think that makes them very palatable to be a serious contender.
Oh, yeah.
To really take seriously in the NBA Finals, and that's why they were the favorites of a lot of people heading into the season. So I don't believe that. I would be really shocked, and I think that shows a lack of coaching and leadership. I don't know. I just think with the veterans on this, I would expect that of a I don't know, way more inexperienced team, like a Oklahoma City Thunder. Let's just hypothetically say if they were to destroy all the teams in the West and not be challenged, I would more lean on that narrative for them. But for a veteran team like the Boston Celtics, unless I see some hardcore evidence, I'm not going to really point to that if they were to lose to the Mavericks.
Yeah, yeah. And interestingly enough, I know you and I chatted about this. I wanted to share with the listener.
Sure.
Based on win-loss record of your opponents, the Celtics have had the 19th easiest path to the NBA Finals. So I think some people would say, while yes, it's true that it is, in the top half of easier paths to the finals, based on the narratives you hear, I don't think I would have been surprised if I had heard like this is the 5th easiest path we've ever seen to the finals, which is certainly not the case. So even though, yes, some of this did involve injuries, and that plays into this narrative too. I agree with a lot of your sentiments there to my question. Wanted to ask you also about Jaylen Brown. He wins the Larry Bird Trophy, which is the Eastern Conference Finals MVP trophy. Did you feel like he was rightly awarded that compared to teammates? There's always this comparison, this back and forth, and you can make a case certainly for Tatum. I think most everyone would agree you could kind of take your pick between those two. And then also just the narratives we've heard lately about Jaylen Brown as a star in this league, even though he has been, at the time of his signing it, he had the most lucrative NBA contract in history. You and I talked about it on the show.
We did.
The narrative around him, and I think the perceived disrespect that he feels and not making an all-NBA team as a prime example has actually fueled him to continue to work harder in spite of making just tons and tons of cash.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think it kind of goes to our first topic about a lot of people, I think, getting upset about the WNBA players feeling jealous or slighted or hurt. Well, this happens in the NBA all the time, and this is what's happening with Brown, and we saw this with The Last Dance with Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan. Scottie Pippen, if he played for some other team, Scottie would be the star. He'd probably be a rival of Michael Jordan, but guess what? He was Michael Jordan's teammate, and Jordan got the shine. Pippen played second fiddle. Was Jordan a better player? Sure. I think the gap between Brown and Tatum is probably a lot closer. Probably decide who is better. Probably somewhat of a coin flip there compared to Jordan and Pippen. But nevertheless,
right.
Were there feelings of jealousy from Scottie to Michael? Yeah, I think. Let's take a look at. Yeah, we still see that all the time. So I'm not surprised to hear Brown's comments. And to me, that feels great athletes. It's them being slighted. It's them feeling disrespected. What do the great athletes do when they feel upset or feel disrespected? They train harder. They work harder. They push themselves. And I think this is no exception. It's a bummer he's not on an All NBA team. That sucks. I know a lot of these guys that's another part of their contracts is being included on that team. So that's a financial incentive. But I don't have a problem with him winning the Larry Bird Trophy at all. I think, like you said, it's a somewhat of a coin flip between Tatum and Brown in terms of who deserves it. But again, I think this is going to be either way, if they lose or if they win, that's a question for either one of these guys. I mean, we'll talk about it later, but I think this question is indicative of where they want their futures to go. Because I never really seen them, if correct if I'm wrong, as like this kind of core tandem together. Am I mistaken on that? Like if you take a look at Steph and Clay and Draymond, or LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, they seem like they're some kind of togetherness. And I feel like it's kind of disjointed between Tatum and Brown. Am I wrong on that?
I think from people we've talked to on the show, it does seem like in the locker room they're tight. I don't know that they're hanging out all the time outside of basketball activities, but it does seem like there is a closeness there, a fondness. It seems like there's a genuine desire for each other to succeed. I believe it was Tatum who said he wanted in the All-Star game for Brown to get more of his minutes. To support him. So I think we see things like that. I think maybe the media towards Boston is a little bit more critical in trying to sniff out any sort of narrative that would say otherwise. Because of course, that's an appealing headline for us to click on. I think there's a good, healthy relationship there and mutual respect for each other. What I will say to add to your comments, which I agree with what you said, one thing where I feel for Jaylen Brown is I think he is a defensive master in an offensive driven NBA at this stage. I think
Agreed.
perhaps in a different era, he would be getting a little bit more of the recognition that he feels he is due. In the modern NBA, that's a little bit different. I would say he's a better defender than some of the players that surpassed him on the all NBA team. That's kind of where we are with the league. It's a tough reality for someone who is great on the defensive side of the ball, like Jaylen Brown. So I do feel some sympathy for him and the way he feels with regards to how he feels he is perceived in the league, at least, and some of the narratives that certainly you see that are out there for him.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Compared to, maybe it's just more they're better at PR than the Celtics are, but maybe they're more just, I guess, reserved in terms of their bond as teammates compared to other duos in the past.
That's true. I think that's fair. I think that's fair to say. Yeah. And we know that, like your Tim Duncans aren't going to get media attention like your Kobe Bryants,
Sure. Yeah, of course.
And so that applies to duos as well. Who's the media
Sure.
darlings versus maybe who's a little more reserved. When I think of the Celtics and media darling, honestly, I think of Jason Tatum's son. When you see him out on the court with dad, like warming up in the game, that's really the warm and fuzzy media stuff, and some of the only warm and fuzzy media stuff I can think of when I think of the Celtics. Granted, I'm a little bit removed being out here in Albuquerque, New Mexico from the Celtics. No. Let's move forward. We have a lot more to get to. I think it's really important that we talk about Minnesota. They avoid the sweep against Dallas. They do get that win in game 4 in Dallas. To their credit, they then get blasted in game 5, and it was just over. We have villain Luka is rising, which I love to see. I'm sure you saw the clip. Reggie Miller kind of incorrectly said, and it's hard to tell when you're in the moment in broadcasting, but I think he thought that Luka was yelling at Snoop Dogg, who was in the front row there. He was actually yelling at a fan who was heckling him. The fan had been giving the crybaby, and I think had a tissue. Was heckling Luka, and I can't really repeat the comments on air, but it was basically like, "Who's crying now, MF? If you get my drift," which I think is kind of awesome to see that villain and that presence. Like, I want to rip your hearts out, fans of Minnesota. I like that competitive edge in the NBA. I like to see that this time of the year in the playoffs. I hope that means that Dallas versus Minnesota is kind of a remembered rivalry-esque type of thing, or there's a little bit of extra booage coming to Luka Doncic when he comes back to Minnesota as a result of this, because it wasn't really close rivalry-wise in terms of this series. Justin, I want to ask you, you and I talked about this, so I think you're okay with me saying we can close the book for the time being on the Anthony Edwards versus Kobe versus MJ discussions that were preemptive, that were out there. I think we all respect Anthony Edwards' charisma, his athleticism, certainly, and the way he performed in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. Unfortunately, there was just poor shooting, poor decision making, and they really got exposed, especially in clutch time against Dallas, which was always kind of the hang up on Minnesota for the year. Like, do they know what to do in clutch time? Those last 5 minutes of the game when the game is close, they didn't know completely what to do here. They were at a loss at times, in spite of Karl Anthony Towns. The only exception is the one game in game 4 where he went off, has this miraculous game. So anyway, I'll stop here. Give me your thoughts on Minnesota, how they should feel about the season, how you're feeling about them moving forward.
Yeah, I know we're short on time, so I'll try just to make this succinct. So, one, I agree with you just in terms of the comparisons of Anthony Edwards to Kobe and Michael. Pretty ridiculous. I don't want to hear ever him and Michael in the same sentence in regards to him being an heir apparent. Now, you compare styles. they're similar in their jump shot and how they move. Sure, that's no problem. But in terms of him being the next face of the league and all this, I think we could stop about that. And also, he's 22. Like, let the guy live a little bit. So that's number one. Number two, I think this is a huge question. What's going to happen to Carl Anthony Towns? How many years has this guy been in the league? I mean, I know that with TNT they get accused of hating, like they're just old men, get off my lawn. They don't understand the game in terms of the 3-point shot. But he's pretty much 7 foot. Like, why is he not going into the paint? I realize he was better in the closeout game, but in other games, like, why is he just taking threes? Like, what is really the mindset of this team? It really goes to game planning too. So I just don't know what the future holds with really Cat in Minnesota in terms of him being kind of a strong number two for this team, because they just got humiliated by Dallas. I picked Minnesota to win this series. They got embarrassed in this series, in a lot of ways. It wasn't even like a 7-game, back and forth war. They got pretty much handled pretty easily, and I don't think that should have been the case. And I think with Karl Anthony Towns, there's a lot of questions there. Would I call it a success or failure for Minnesota? I would call it a success, but with a lot of question marks, especially for Cat. That's for sure.
I think it's disappointing the way it ended.
Yeah.
After you see them take away the former champ Denver Nuggets.
Yeah.
When that series dropped, coming out of that series, you're feeling like, wow, is Anthony Edwards going to win a title at 22? Like that feels in the realm of possibility for where they're at and where they're peaking. And then to see the wheels come off as they did against Dallas. Now, Luka and Kyrie, no slouches. It's legitimate competition, but it is also the 5 seed. You have home court advantage against them.
It's true.
It's a disappointing way for things to flame out. You bring up good points about Karl Anthony Towns. And I would say that 3-pointers for a big, unless you're an elite level shooter like Nowitzki was at his time, 3-point shooting is a passive movement rather than an aggressive movement for a big. It's a lot of the complaints about Joel Embiid. Granted, Joel has been fantastic on the offensive end of the floor the last 2 seasons. So it's been a little less of a question for him. But if you could say there's a weakness in his offensive game, it would be those games where he decides to take lots of 3-point attempts. Like, why are you doing this when you're so good from mid-range and inside, especially? And I think that same criticism and critique can be not only directed at Karl Anthony Towns, but other elite level bigs when it comes to this type of conversation. So that's what I would be if Cat is staying with the Timberwolves, as it seems like he probably will, although you never know. Working on a post game and figuring out also how they're going to work that with Rudy Gobert in the lineup too, so they don't clog up the paint. I wanted to ask you this too, because immediately after Dallas advances, and we're moving towards our finals prediction here, Luka is crowned, and maybe it's on Bill Simmons' podcast. There does tend to be some prisoner of the moment takes from time to time, as much as, hey, from time to time, I enjoy that podcast. And I think Bill Simmons overall has done a lot of good things for sports media. We can be a little bit prisoner of the moment. One example of this would be talking about and just kind of weighing, we have 3-time MVP Nikola Jokic, who I think many would say, myself included, just to state my bias, is the best player in the world right now. Dallas advances to the finals, and we have a conversation starting already of, is Luka the best in the world? Is he taking, in the Bill Simmons podcast, he has this idea of the title belt, Justin, as you're familiar, the wrestling title belt, who is the greatest player in the league right now. I understand Luka, if Dallas were to win, would be the most recent champion. But are you in on this with him being considered the best player in the league right now? Let's just grant you that Luka wins the finals. Is he the best player in your mind?
How many MVPs has Luka won?
That would be a bagel.
So let's say he wins finals MVP. That's not, that's, I guess we can talk about the merits of that. How many championships would he have won if, let's play out that scenario?
One championship.
How many does Jokic have?
Jokic won last year. He has one.
Okay. So you take a look at, if we're comparing metrics there, I think you're right. It's prisoner of the moment. And I like Luka, and I think he does have a chance to be the face of the league. Um, I believe in him more. I don't, because they're talking about Jason Tatum. They're talking about Anthony Edwards. I really think if there's going to be a new heir apparent with, LeBron's future in question and, Steph Curry, advancing age, I think Luka is probably a great candidate to pick as the face of the league. I think with Jokic, I think just he has a very Tim Duncan-esque personality about him, even though he's awesome. I think if you appreciate basketball, if you've seen the guy live, we have both. He's incredible. I don't. Sometimes I don't really get other people saying he's boring or can't understand why he's great. I just watch the guy play. But I think Luka has a more aesthetically pleasing style. I hate to say that, but I think it's the truth to a casual fan base. And I think because of that, it's a lot easier to say, oh, well, he talks trash and he beat Anthony Edwards. He also talks trash and he's the next heir apparent where you can forget about the Joker. So I think it's a little bit presumptuous to just crown him. However, if he wins the title, he wins MVP. I think there's a possibility in the future to take that title away from the Joker. But as of now, no.
Yeah, and I do think, to your point, you could see this period of time where I think in 3 years, Jokic will be 32, and there will probably be, in terms of talent levels, a handoff period where Jokic is no longer the most talented, and that maybe is Luka. But I think Jokic, if we're doing the title belt thing, Jokic is still holding the belt, and I don't care if he lost one postseason. He's still got that in my mind, especially, some would argue he should be the 4-time repeating MVP in the league. In my mind, when you have that much media support and you have the work done and the accolades, you're still that guy right now. I think Jokic took it from Giannis, and he's still holding on to it, even if Luka wins the title this year. It's a great thing for Luka if he does win the title this year, obviously. I want to touch on one more player here, Justin, and then I want to get into our preview. Kyrie's fit in Dallas. I feel like we have to talk about this because he was such a low value asset at the time that Dallas got him from Brooklyn. People were saying that Dallas overpaid for him. People were saying it was too much to give up first round draft picks. However, Kyrie has flipped the script on that. And I think it's fair to question, there's a lot of chaos in Brooklyn. And even before that, on past visits, it was chaotic in Boston as well. We all know this. Talk to me about Kyrie's fit in Dallas, what you're seeing. Are you impressed by it? And is it unexpected?
Somewhat, I think so. But I have to give Kyrie credit. And I know he took a lot of heat, including from us on the show, about what happened to him in Brooklyn, COVID. However, I do think in Dallas, I think he's been a great teammate. He's been great to Luka. This was a huge question mark. Two guys that are ball dominant. How are they going to fit? And they fit really well. And I think that's awesome. And I think especially when you see as Steph and Clay, both guys in their prime, eating the ball, being very active with threes, and I think with Kyrie and with Lucas having a similar setup, I think it's proven that you can have two ball dominant guards, even with Tatum and Brown. I think it's very interesting to see that. So overall, I am impressed, and I think Kyrie deserves his props, despite how polarizing he is. So I think he's learned to. I think he's grown, and I think honestly, this title is probably going to be the sweetest if there are just to pull it off, especially with the bad blood that he has with Boston. So
absolutely, I like to see, honestly too. He said, I love this when Giannis was so positive about Chris Middleton, and Kyrie has been super positive, supporting up Luka Doncic and being totally transparent and self-aware that he is the second option on this team. You don't always see superstars of his caliber do things like this. I feel he's been very gracious to Luka and the Dallas team as a whole. That's just good stuff to see. And I want to see any player, in spite of how you feel about his past and those controversies, things like that. I do like to see a redemption story personally, and I think that's what we're seeing with Kyrie. So I personally like that, and I'm glad to see the page turn on his career in this direction rather than another kind of flame out or controversy coming up or things like that. It's just refreshing.
It is. No, it's good to see, especially just he's just been so linked to controversy. It's just nice to have him have a clear slate just heading into probably the biggest series of his life.
Absolutely. Let's go into our finals preview, and we'll wrap up with this, Justin. This starts on Thursday, June 6th. For those of you that don't know, probably anyone listening to this, you probably already knew that. So we have a tale of two teams, really. We have the Celtics that are historically great, one seed across the board for almost the entire year in the Eastern Conference, led by many, many games, even to the second seed. And really, dominated and ran through their competition, have been doing kind of everything they're supposed to do. I had questions about them, even in their matchup back against Cleveland. I didn't have doubts they would be the victors, but I wanted to see them kind of send a message. I don't know that they really did like a beatdown or a stomping type of thing, but they had a smooth run through the playoffs as it should have been. So definitely, you want to pat the Celtics on the back for that. There are 5 teams. There's 4 other teams that have a higher regular season point differential than the Celtics historically. All 4 of those teams won the NBA Finals. There's also a number, I can't remember how many teams it is, but when you have 20 losses or less regular season and postseason combined and you head into the finals, I believe every team that's gone into the finals that way has won the finals. Or no, I'm sorry, that's not right, because the Warriors didn't do it in 2016. I think that was one of the few exceptions. So you have a lot of history telling us that the Celtics are primed to win this, should be the favorite, and are the favorite going into this series. On the other side, Justin, just to paint the full picture before I throw it to you, Dallas is hot. Ever since the trade deadline, they are hot. PJ Washington has been incredible for them in the postseason, especially. It's been unexpected, and they've come through as a 5 seed, beating bigger seeds than them throughout the postseason. It's been very impressive in a Western Conference that was supposed to be kind of insurmountable to the teams in the lower seeds. They've really defied all expectations there. And I feel like they are the hotter team by no fault of the Celtics, but just because the path that was carved for Dallas and how they were able to just run right through it is very interesting to see. You know my pick, Justin, and I'll gladly reveal it, but I want to get your thoughts on the series first. Any thoughts you have about the teams, and then if you want to drop your pick on us for the NBA Finals.
Yeah, sure. So I think lots of bad blood. I think this is great for the league. I think if the ratings are poor, that's the NBA's fault.
I'm glad you bring that up. Tell me why there's bad blood, in case the listener doesn't know.
So you have Kristaps Porzingis, very infamous, being drafted to the Knicks, and Stephen A. Smith hating the pick, and then kind of being, I would say a journeyman somewhat, playing for the Wizards, playing for the Mavericks is very known story that Luka and Kristaps did not like each other. And I think, a lot of people just, they're ignorant. They just thought, well, they're European, they'll get along, and that did not happen. So,
and arguably, Luka got him shipped out of town.
Yeah.
There's buzz about that. I can't confirm that, but
sure.
You would imagine they wouldn't trade him if Luka was like, no, keep me.
Of course. I know, totally agree. No, yeah, absolutely. So with him in Boston, seems like a better fit. Very unfortunate that he's been hurt. He comes back. He's likely for game 1 from what I've been told. So what I've read from just the major sources from the Celtics. So that's a storyline. We know about Kyrie's tenure with Boston as well.
Yes.
So there's bad blood with that regard. So I think that's exciting. And it's exciting because you have really 2 home courts that are very active, right? With Boston, You know their pedigree. If you know anything about basketball, you know the legacy of the Boston Celtics. You know about Dallas Mavericks in terms of what Mark Cuban is able to do with that franchise. So you have two, I would say Dallas, I wouldn't say on par with LA and Los Angeles, but still a large market team. And you have Boston, which is one of the stalwarts of the NBA and arguably all sports. So very entertaining there. All around to get to, it's corny to say, but defense wins championships. And I just think the Celtics are the better defensive team, especially with Drew Holiday. And that's why I'm picking the Celtics in 7. But I think with Luka and I think with Kyrie, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see both of these kind of 4 guys test each other. I think it's a great matchup between those 4 guys. Kristaps, seeing how Dallas's length, how they were able to really exploit that with Minnesota. Are they able to do that against Boston? But I am picking the Celtics in 7. That'll make my dad happy. He's from Boston, so.
I think that's a good pick. I think with everything that we mentioned of the history and the numbers that the Celtics have put up, that is certainly deservedly the favorite. And I think most people will pick Boston because of that. As you know, I have trouble trusting the Celtics for some odd reason.
Makes sense.
I think some of this has to do, you're right, they are a good defensive, versatile team, especially when you look at like Derek White. And you mentioned Drew Holiday, of course. And if they have Porzingis, then they have rim protection that they sorely need and won't have without him. So some of this hinges on Porzingis. But I think my reservation with the Celtics is also sometimes their low 3-point shooting percentage, particularly from their stars, and heavy reliance on 3-point shots at times, which can make or break you in the finals. It could lead to huge blowouts of Dallas. It could lead to, off shooting nights where maybe Dallas is able to run up the score on them in the other way if they're getting more consistent creation from Luka, who is like a creation machine, as we know.
Yeah.
So personally, I would almost lock in as a guarantee that Dallas is going to win either game 1 or game 2, one of those first games in Boston. I feel very confident about that just from them playing more recently and not really knowing how Porzingis is going to be early on in the stages of this finals. Even if he comes back and he's healthy, it's been, I think, almost 40 days since the last time he played a basketball game. This time of year, when the intensity is dialed up, I do think that's a big deal. And also, do we know, is he going to play more than 18 minutes or so the first time he's back? I don't know. All those things, I would guarantee that Dallas is going to win one of these first 2 games. That doesn't mean Dallas is going to win the series, but I am biased. I want the Luka villain narrative to come up. Maybe not the face of the league, but the villain that the league maybe needs. I'm picking Dallas in 7. I think the intensity of Dallas, I think they're very ready for this series. And I want to see if the Celtics are as ready and can meet that challenge. I agree with the point you made earlier that they do have veteran leadership. They've been there, and even their coach should have them ready for the moment, even in his young tenure. I think Mazzulla's been pretty solid this year on the coaching side, and maybe even has the advantage over Coach Kidd. Man, I'm kind of just trusting that Dallas is kind of the hot team that the New York Giants were when they took out the 16-0 Patriots at the time, to use a football analogy here. That's kind of how I see this playing out. Would not shock me at all, though, Justin, if you are correct in your pick, or even if Boston takes this in 6, to say all that. But for the sake of fun, I'm gonna put my money on my fictional podcast money on Dallas in 7 here for this series.
Yeah, it's close. It could go either way. What I am hoping for, and if my pick is wrong, so be it, is that this is a very competitive series.
Yeah.
I'm kind of disappointed in this year's playoffs. A lot of blowouts and bad blowouts, like 30-point, 25-point blowouts, or at least, it's like a huge lead heading into the fourth quarter. It's not great for the league, and it's not great for the fans. So I hope you have a lot of great storyline. Everything's set up to be very competitive. even if it goes 7 games and there's blowouts every single game, that sucks too. I'd rather have it be in 6 and it be super close than just a 7-game series and it's just blowouts on everybody's home floor. That's not good for the league.
Totally with you there. And I think in analysis I've been listening to across the board, it seems like nobody is really sure who to pick, which is very interesting given all that historical data with Boston. It should feel like an easier thing to pick Boston, but I think that shows you the respect that the league and analysts has towards Luka and Kyrie and how they're performing lately. And also the knowledge that Luka probably is the best player in the series. So even though he may be on the worst team of the two overall as a constructed unit, there's a little bit of respect and fear about Luka might just go insane and take over this finals. So looking forward to see what happens. Thank you guys for sticking with us to the end of the show. Let us know your picks as well. What's your finals pick? We'll just throw it to you simply there. Who you got, Dallas or Boston? You going to take a risk and roll the dice with me, or are you going to trust Boston getting the job done as they should, as I think is probably the smarter pick? Let us know in the comments there. For Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. We have other storylines to cover. We'll get to that next episode. This has been In the Lab with Hoopsology. Take care and peace out.
See you next time.